Hey, everybody. I'm back. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Dan on here. And
It took forever to figure that out.
give me a
But
second.
I
I have to
believe we
put my
did it.
headphones on.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me, Dan?
I can.
Awesome. I can hear you too. That's great. Hey, thanks for taking the time to sit here and talk with me for a little while tonight. And
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I apologize for the delay in figuring this out. I didn't think it was going to be that complicated.
yeah, well, better late than never.
That's for sure.
So yeah, it's a so this is your time. We can talk about anything that you'd like to talk about. I know you want to talk about your book. If there's anything else you want to talk about, you're more than welcome to. We can talk about whatever you'd like. I'm honored to have you here, and I appreciate you being here this evening. Uh, so I guess to get started, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about how did you get involved with this case in West Memphis? I'll admit, so this was happening. It was May of '93. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So in May of '93, I was actually living in Iowa going to college at that time. So, and honestly, I didn't even know where Jonesboro was. um, I'm originally from the Northwest Arkansas, Southwest Missouri. So, I'm from the
Oh, okay.
opposite side of the state. I didn't move. I moved here about 20 years ago. So, yeah, this was like, I knew it was someplace in Arkansas, but I had no idea where. Um, and I'm up in Iowa, and people are saying, "Did you hear about this crazy thing that happened in Arkansas?" And I was like, "Look, the president wears shoes, okay?" And but um, but no, so I guess let's start there, and then you've got the open floor. Talk about whatever you want. But how did you get started? What led you
Well,
up to getting involved with this case?
of course, I was here. Actually, I was in Little Rock fishing with my dad on there's somebody. Good evening, Judge. Attach you find a PC. I don't know what that was. Was that a message for me or?
That must have been a message for you. I didn't see that
Okay.
show up in my channel. So,
Well, it popped up and now it's gone. So
oh, okay.
I happened to be in Little Rock on the day that the boys went missing, or the bodies were found on May 6th, the day after. And we had been out fishing, and we were putting the fishing tackle up, and CNN breaks through with some news out of West Memphis, Arkansas, and immediately started talking about the fact that the three boys were found nude, bound with, I think the term they used was hogtied. And then as we watched it, because we were glued to the TV at that point, as we watched it, it started talking about one of the boys had been sexually mutilated. And I'm thinking, CNN's covering all this as instant news. How's that happening? And so I remember, not, like I'm very interested in what happened. And the only thing I could come up with is there was a lot of heightened gang activity in both Memphis and Little Rock at that time. And so I thought it might have been a drug deal or a gang initiation or something like that. And as the days went by, there was more and more talk about satanic cults and satanic rituals, and all of this was. I just thought this is kind of weird. But as I left Little Rock to come back home to Perigo, my dad said, "Whatever you do, don't get involved in that case." And I said, "Well, I'm so far away from West Memphis in Perigo, there's no way that I would get that case." And so I got a phone call on June the 3rd. I'm sorry, June 6th or 7th. And it was Judge David Goodson, who was from Paragould, still is, lives here, and he's retired now. But he just happened to be in Marion the day they were appointing lawyers to represent the three defendants. And so he asked me if I would represent Jesse Miskelly. And we both talked about it. He said, there's lawyers flocking here to represent the other two, but nobody wants to represent Jesse Miskelly because he's the one that's confessed. So all you'll have to do is get him ready to testify, and it shouldn't be that big a deal. You'll be on TV a couple times, and it'll be over and done. And so I still was thinking about what my dad had told me, and so I tried to call my law partner. He didn't answer the phone, and I ended up going to the one person that I thought would talk me out of it because I was really leaning that way towards taking the case. So I had just gotten out of the shower and was still in a towel. And so I asked her to come back to the bedroom, and I said, "Hey, this is what's going on." And without a second's hesitation, she said, "You should do it. This is why you went to law school. This is what you like, and you should do it." And I thought, wow, I just was stunned that she said, "Do it." I figured she would talk me out of it. So Judge Goodson had given me 20 minutes to respond. I called him back with about 2 minutes left and said, "I'm available and I'll do it." And had no idea that the journey would last over 30 years. This May 5th will be the 31st anniversary of the boys' deaths and the murders. And I have been working very hard. My partner and my co-author, Tom McCarthy, writing a book about my experiences in the case. And so it was a daunting task because the when you're writing a book, the first thing that pops in your head is a narrative. Is you go chronologically. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, and this happened. But the first draft ended up being 550 pages long, which is way too long for a book. And so a friend of mine in LA, he called me up and asked how things were going. And I said, "Well, we're struggling with the narrative." And he goes, "Tell it like the Titanic." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Tell it like the Titanic, the movie. The old lady going back out there while they're sending the sub down to look at the pictures for the first time of the wreck, and you're telling the story through her eyes. And of course, they had the flashbacks going back when she was a young lady interacting with Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Kate Winslet, and so it was basically the older lady telling them the story about the night the ship sunk.
Okay.
And so this is the same narrative that we chose. It's called a non-linear narrative. And if you've ever watched the first HBO true crime documentary or show that they did, it was called True Detectives. And Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey played police officers, and they did the non-linear narrative as well. It was them being deposed by new lawyers on the case that they had solved, and the same thing with the third season of True Detectives, which was filmed in Arkansas, and mimicked a lot of what we were experiencing in the case itself, the weird satanic stuff and bicycles, kids on bicycles, and so ended up that was the narrative that we used, and it turned out great because it was basically the older Dan, and I was just a kid when I got appointed to this case. I had just been practicing law 5 years. I was 30 years old. I had just turned 30 years old, and I now I'm 60, so it's been 30 years. And so the narrative for the book is the older Dan looking back at all the things that occurred back in 1993 and 94 and all the appeal process. And so I focus on the Miss Kelly trial because that's the one I was involved in, obviously. I
Right.
didn't attend the other trial. So I mostly talk about the trial that I was involved in and all the things that happened and all the strange things that shouldn't have happened. But I was a young lawyer, and when you look back through the prism of 30 years, things look a lot different. So I rewatched the documentaries, and I actually had someone anonymously send me every moment of the trials, both trials on DVD. And so when we first started writing, I popped one in, and I was so shocked watching my younger self getting steamrolled and taken advantage of by the prosecutors and the judge, and I didn't realize it at the time, but 30 years later, it was very obvious to me,
Hmm.
pouring it through that filter and that prism. And so I started, and it was very difficult to watch that because, there were some things that I just didn't either do or should have done. And so in the book, I'm as hard on myself as I am anyone else involved in the case. But the stuff that went on is just so obviously wrong in all respects that I just felt compelled to write the book so that I could set the record straight and tell the truth about what really happened, and how the case ended, because it ended in a bizarre way with an Alford plea, which is where a client pleads guilty to a crime while maintaining their innocence. It's sort of like a tie football game, or it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. I don't allow Alford pleas in my courtroom because you either did it or you didn't, and if you didn't, we're going to have a trial, and if you did, you can plead guilty.
Okay.
But in an Alford plea, you do both. You
You,
say you didn't do it, you're innocent, but you recognize the state has evidence, and then it's possible they could convict you, so that to avoid a trial, you're taking the plea deal. And the plea
okay.
deal is essentially 10 years with uh, with not the usual standards, like no alcohol, there was no drugs, of course, and no firearms, and but they were a lot softer than the usual plea arrangement would be. It was more like an SIS than anything else, a
Hmm.
suspended imposition of sentence.
Okay.
So all they had to do is basically stay out of trouble for the next 10 years, which they easily did. And but I was not the architect of the Alford plea, so I didn't understand it. Didn't understand how it happened, where it came from, whose initiative it was. And at the time it happened, I had no idea it was about to happen. I got a phone call from Scott Ellington, who was the prosecuting attorney at the time, and said, "Hey, you need to be in Jonesboro in the morning at 9:30." And I was like, "For what?" And he said, "Your boy's getting out." And I said, "Boy, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Miss Kelly." And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "It's an Alford plea." And I didn't know what that was at the time, so I had to look it up. And so at first glance, your client's walking out of prison, basically time served, and he gets to go home and see his father, and not be a prisoner anymore after 18 years and 78 days. And for Damien Echols, it meant walking away from death row. So the one holdout was Jason Baldwin. He was the third member of the West Memphis Three, and he wanted to get a new trial and be completely exonerated. But Damien's health was failing. Had been in a 10 by 12 concrete room for 18 years and 78 days. His eyesight was deteriorating, and I think once a week they would let him out in the yard by himself and see the sunlight or the rain or whatever the weather was. But he was just basically in this concrete vault, and so ultimately Jason decided that he couldn't let his decision be the thing that broke the deal, and they said it was an all or nothing deal. And Ellington even told me they were willing to leave Jesse behind at first, so it would be Damien and Jason getting out, but not Jesse. And Ellington said, I wouldn't go for that because I knew you'd hate me for the rest of my life. And I said, told him you were right about that. So they walked out, but I had no idea what happened and why it happened. So I show up the next morning and there's even more confusion. And finally, we had a set of East Coast lawyers and West Coast lawyers for the appellate teams, and this was almost entirely orchestrated by the new East Coast lawyer that had just been on the case for 10 months or so. And he's the one that suggested it, took it to Ellington and offered it. And Ellington knew that this case is, almost 2 decades long. There's witnesses who passed away. And he said publicly in a news article that he knew the witchcraft Satan angle wasn't going to work, and he'd have to do 3 trials instead of 1 or 2. And he said, I just want to get rid of it. And he said he felt it was a gift from God that he was able to negotiate that Alford plea. But when I talked to the lawyers in San Francisco representing Miss Kelly and Baldwin, they were both upset. That the word that John Phillipsthorne used was nauseating. The whole thing was nauseating because we all believed wholeheartedly that we were going to get a new trial because we had managed to completely destroy the state's case. It was, as one of the writers that I quoted in my book said, there was nothing more than a well-told campfire story as evidence against these kids. And that's the best way I can describe what the Alford plea is that. So that was the 3 goals that I set out because my client, who's mentally challenged, the old word back in 93, 30 years ago, was mentally retarded. Today's world, the jargon is mentally handicapped or intellectually disabled. But and they don't go by just IQ scores alone. They go by what this person is able to do and not do. Some people who have they also call it MR, which is short for mental retardation. But he said some people with MR can hold down a job. Some of them can drive a car, take the subway, have a girlfriend, and do lots of things. In fact, some of them are brilliant artists, and their brains just wired different. And it's sort of like the same thing with the autism spectrum. It's just your brain's wired a little bit differently than someone who would be considered quote unquote normal. So, and John Douglas, the famous profiler, got involved in the case, and I had, with money from Eddie Vedder, one of the celebrities that got involved in the case, he gave us some funds, and we hired some retired FBI profilers, and they came out and basically said they thought it was because of the location where Interstate 40, Interstate 55 enter sept each other and become one, merge together, and then separate again as you go east. You either go over the 55 bridge or the 40 bridge. And then coming back, it's either going Little Rock or going to St. Louis. So there's more than, last time I checked, 10,000 big rigs that go through there every day,
Right.
which is a significant number. It's the third busiest interstate exchange in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And so they felt like the two profilers that I spoke with and consulted with, they seemed to think it was probably somebody passing through. And the crime scene where the boys were found, which I call the dump site, because there was no blood anywhere there. There was about a 10-acre truck stop where you could back up your truck and plug it into a post and sleep. Truckers are required to sleep so many hours per day to do their jobs. And so that became the theory for me, and I believed it. I still do. John Douglas and I agree to disagree on that. He thinks it was somebody that knew the kids, and one of us is right and one of us is wrong, so that's what I think happened. And I actually have a suspect who was an over-the-road truck driver. Now that I've got the book done, that's my next journey to take, is to I can put this person in West Memphis as a truck driver the year before, in 1992. And so, of course, that could be a coincidence, but I've just got to follow up and do some background digging, and I actually have been contacted by another over-the-road truck driver, serial killer, Hunter Keith Jesperson. The happy face killer was what he called himself. And when he signs his name, he writes a little happy face at the end of his signature. And so I'm hoping to go out and be able to interview him to get some insight on how he did things. He's serving 7 life sentences, I think. So I plan to visit with him and then move on towards my suspect.
Okay.
But that's kind of the way the book ended. But my goals were, number one, to finally tell the cold hard truth of the matter and what happened during my trial that shouldn't have happened to begin with. And I don't want to spoil those who might be interested in reading the book, but as the 60-year-old Dan looking back at the 30-year-old Dan was able to recognize those things. This was my first jury trial, triple capital murder, 3 8-year-old boys. It's a great way to start jury trial experience. So I have kids that are that age now, and it's like, I wouldn't want them representing me. One of them is a lawyer. She's a contract specialist and works in Northwest Arkansas. And so she's not trying criminal stuff. My son-in-law is a prosecutor up there. So they look like kids to me, and I've got grandkids now that are very small. But that was the first thing that I noticed, is just how young I was and how inexperienced I was. And I didn't meet the ABA standards at the time, but that didn't seem to matter to the court. It was a witch hunt, and it really seemed like it was going to be a lynching there at the beginning. It was that bad. And they received numerous death threats. I got some death threats. My law partner did. It was tough. And then, being from a small town in Paragould, people talk, and they couldn't understand why a young lawyer like myself would embark on this journey of representing a satanic child killer. And for the first 90 days or so, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But on the 90th day, I figured out finally that he was innocent. Had never been to this place, didn't know these kids, and that his confession was false and coerced by the police. So then I hired the best expert on the planet, who I say hired. He volunteered because I didn't have any money as a public defender to fund anything, except my gold card at the time. But I hired a expert on false confessions, and I hired an expert. Again, both of them donated their times. They were later reimbursed partially by the court, but for their airfare, basically, they got their airfare reinstated that they used. But we brought these people in thinking that we were going to win this case at the trial court level. I had every reason to believe that I was going to walk this kid in my first jury trial, but the judge shut down our experts and wouldn't let them testify. So, that when we did the proffer, a proffer is what you do outside the presence of a jury so that you can make a record for the appellate court to review on what you would have introduced had the judge allowed you to introduce it. And so after we did the proffer, all the media people in the courtroom, and there were lots of them, I actually sat on that bench in Corning now, and it's hard for me to believe we had that trial in such a small place, but we did. And still has the same nasty green carpet and the same paint on the walls, and I mean, it just makes the hair in the back of my neck stand up every time I go in there. But they all came up to me and said, "You're going to win this case." And I said, "Well, the sad part of this is the jury didn't get to hear what you heard. If the jury had heard it, yes, we would have won the case." And there's no question in my mind that we would have. But Judge Burnett knew that too, and he was a former prosecutor. And as the legend goes, and some prominent lawyer in Jonesboro once said to Judge Burnett in open court, "Why don't you and the prosecutor just wear jerseys with your names on the back so there won't be any question in the jury box on whose team you're on?" And that's pretty much the way it was all through our trial. But I planted a seed at the suppression hearing that we had them in the corner on a Rule 2.3 argument, and Rule 2.3 basically says if you get invited to the police station to discuss the case, whether you're a suspect or not, you have to be told affirmatively that you do not have to comply and come to the police station if you don't want to. And the officer testified that he didn't give any warnings. So, and 50 years of case law said that if you don't give the warnings, anything that's said at the police station is thrown out. And that was the only evidence they had. There was no physical evidence linking any of the West Memphis Three. So I planted that seed, and it finally grew into a giant oak tree in 2012 when we were able to completely destroy their case with that one little seed, put them in the corner. And during my ineffective assistance of counsel hearing, because when the Arkansas Supreme Court heard the appeal, they said we didn't raise the 2.3 issue when we actually did. I drafted the order saying that Judge Burnett considered it, and they said we didn't raise it in a timely fashion. And so I got thrown under the bus by the Arkansas Supreme Court just so they wouldn't have to let this kid go. And so as you can imagine, that really pissed me off. And my dad, who's 83 now and not in good health, he taught me to never back down from a bully. And so I made a promise to my client that I would get him out of prison one day or die trying. And when I got thrown under the bus, that just infuriated me, and I began fighting back with what I had, with the resources that I had. And essentially, I just made sure that no deadlines passed until we could get lawyers willing to assist us. And I could find no lawyer in the state of Arkansas that would get involved in the case. So I actually filed my own ineffective assistance of counsel claim against myself for my client to sign, and I ended up also doing Jason Baldwin's because his lawyers had abandoned him. And so the irony is that Judge Burnett could have dismissed those Rule 37 ineffective assistance of counsel claims at any time, but he liked that camera so much that he couldn't help it, and he wanted to be on trial and have a record of it. So it was all there, in black and white, and when they used parts of the first two films and the last film, HBO would show that in black and white, so you could tell it was from a previous documentary. There was a trilogy that they had made, and so it was all there. And I testified truthfully to everything that I saw. And I guess back in 2008 and 2009, I would have been 55. Is that right?
Don't get me to lying.
I took 3 semesters of German to get out of one math class. So I was born in 63. So yeah, when I got divorced, my marriage didn't survive this case. I was 45. And so through my 45 eyes, looking back, it was obvious what happened. And I watched all the videos, and of course I'd kept copious notes and recordings of my client. And we destroyed completely their case. What they said was a satanic ritual turned out to be animal predation on the kids when after their bodies were thrown in the creek. And so these murders in West Memphis in 1993 of those 3 8-year-old kids were not the first ever satanic ritualistic homicide ever on the planet. There's never been a single documented case of it. And so it was a less serial killer passing through, either in a big rig or a car. The kids were last seen riding their bicycles, or 3 of them on 2 bicycles at 6:30 p.m. Just right there where their bodies were found, literally. And so I don't think that was a coincidence at all. So that's the long version of how I got involved in the case, and it seems to be a series of phone calls. I got one saying, "Would you represent this indigent, mentally challenged teenager, and then show up tomorrow because your kid's getting out of prison?" And then the phone call from all the lawyers I interviewed, trying to figure out what happened and why we didn't just do a new trial. If we knew we were going to get one, why did we give up? And so when I found out the truth, I got pissed off again. So for about 8 of those 10 years of writing that book, it was I was pretty angry. In fact, our post-conviction psychologist, who interviewed Mr. Miskelly after the conviction. He's the one who determined that Jesse was mentally retarded and could not understand or help us assist him in his defense. And he technically was not mentally capable of standing trial at all. He didn't even understand what a lawyer was. And he thought I was a police officer. He told me that one day.
Oh, wow.
I went to interview him in jail before the trial. He said, you're a cop, aren't you? And I said, no, I'm your lawyer. And he goes, what's a lawyer? So he couldn't get any of the narrative right. And had it happened the way the prosecution presented it to the jury, if you witness 3 young kids being raped and sodomized and sexually mutilated, you're going to remember that day for the rest of your life, and it'll be as vivid 30 years ago as it is today. And he couldn't remember nothing about it. He got the kids wrong who had been mutilated and who hadn't, and there were 2 brunette young boys and 1 blonde, and he kept insisting it was the blonde kid who had been sexually mutilated with a knife. And of course, it turns out they weren't sexually mutilated. They were obviously sexualized in some fashion, but it was turtles, raccoons, and crawfish. Nature takes over. They can smell death immediately, and their job is to take care of that problem. And that was just overnight. If they'd been left in that creek much longer, they would have been skeletized. That's the real story, and that's a story I tell. Of course, that's the Reader's Digest condensed version of the story. But
well, yeah, you don't want to give it all away. That's
no,
what you wrote a book for.
It was important for me that the world know what happened. So my first goal was because my client not only gave a false confession to the police, he also gave a false confession to the prosecutor without my permission, which was a violation of his right to counsel, and which he admitted years later at another hearing. And then there was a police car confession when they were taking him to the prison. After I told the cops not to talk to my client, they did anyway, knowing it wouldn't be admissible. But so then he confessed to me, and when I challenged him on, give me something that'll corroborate this confession, and he couldn't do it. The former prosecutor and I disagree on that, and I point that out in the book. He has a different version than mine, but I won't give that away either. But that's a very important spot in the book. But I wanted to be able to explain why my client confessed and how it happens. Mr. Miskelly has a low IQ and he's mentally retarded. And he does what the psychologist calls cheats to win. And if you're not very smart, and according to the psychologist, 98% of everybody on the planet is intellectually superior to Jesse Miskelly.
Oh, wow.
So that means every first grader, third grader, lawyer, judge, police officer, and he doesn't have that classic mental retardation appearance to him. You wouldn't just walk up to him and say, "You're mentally retarded," so what he would do is he would just basically agree with whatever people told him, because he didn't want to appear to be he didn't want to feel stupid, I guess is the best way to put that. So
Okay.
he cheated to win. He pretended like he understood something when he didn't. And they told him, if you'll just tell us what we want to hear, you'll get to go home and sleep in your own bed tonight, which they lied to him, of course. They locked him up and then went and arrested the other two. So the way they treated that poor kid is just, it's inhumane. And false confessions are very real. So I wanted to be able to explain what a false confession was and how they occur and how they still occur today. But 30 years later, people now understand that there is a science behind that. And the FBI has changed their interrogation techniques, and most of the larger police departments have changed their interrogation techniques. The Reed method, which was a long held technique that was used when you open the Reed technique book, the first thing that you read in the book is if you follow these steps, you are guaranteed to get a confession. So it tells you right up front that they don't care whether it's true or not. They just tell you you're going to get a confession. And Jesse didn't tell the police anything that they didn't already know. He just parroted back to them what they were asking him. And after 12 hours or so, they finally decided to get a tape recorder, an audio tape recorder with the big cassette. And even though they had the ability to either tape it or videotape it through the entire 12 hours, they chose to just audio tape literally about 29 minutes worth. And so imagine the frustration of these police officers when they had been going over this with him all day since 9 in the morning until 9 at night, and he still gets it wrong. He says that little boys had skipped school that day, which they didn't. They were all picked up at school by their parents. Jason Baldwin was in school till 3 o'clock as well. So it didn't happen at 9 o'clock in the morning. And like he first said, and it didn't happen at noon, as he next said. And then the officer asked him if he could tell time or not, which is kind of telling. If you have to ask a 17-year-old whether they can tell time or not, that means you recognize that they have a problem, or you should. And then at one point, they even actually asked him if he knew what a penis was. And I would submit to you, despite your intellectual capabilities, most 17-year-olds know what that is, naturally speaking. So, and he uses phrases that were obviously him parroting back. He referred to the little boys as the buyers and the mower and the branch. And what he was looking at was the newspaper article that said the branch and the mower and the buyer's children. So he was just looking at a newspaper clipping, and that's how he referred to them because he didn't know who they were. They had to show him pictures. But there's several different kinds of false confessions. There's the kind where the police actually, after a long interrogation, actually make the person believe that they're responsible. That's probably the rarest form of a false confession. The psychologists and the people who are the experts on false confessions will tell you that after 4 hours of interrogation, especially if there's teams of officers, and the Reed technique is one of them plays good cop, the other plays bad cop, and they double team you, and one gets in your face and is screaming at you while the other one's trying to act like the good guy. And so we didn't have a videotape to watch, so we don't know what happened during that 12 hours, except the 29 minutes of tape. But after 12 hours, you'll say or do anything just to get the hell out of the stress of this interrogation. And there's been college students who've confessed to murders they didn't commit. There's one case I recall specifically that the kid confessed just to get out of the room. And he knew he was going to get away with it because he was in Europe at the time the murder took place. He was vacationing with his family, so he was lucky. But and then there's the kind that happened in the John Benet Ramsey case where somebody looking for 20 minutes of fame. There was a school teacher that was in Thailand, I believe, that stepped forward and said he killed John Benet Ramsey, and they zoomed in there and picked him up and brought him back to Colorado and interrogated him. And of course, he didn't know anything about the case, and he was just seeking attention. And then there's the kind that Mr. Miskelly was. They never convinced him that he did it. He just said it thinking that he could fix it later. He's what we call a concrete thinker. A concrete thinker is a person who is only concerned about what's happening at this very moment. If I got two cops grilling me for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I want to get out of here and go home, it would actually make sense for that person to, and then in this case, Jesse Miskelly, to just simply tell them what they want to hear, and then you can take it back later and show your alibi, and and be good to go. But that didn't happen in this case because the alibi got too shaky, which I explained in the book how that happened. But interestingly, well, I'm not going to even tell that story because that is so aha of a moment. I don't want to ruin it,
Okay.
but Jesse is not an abstract thinker like you and I. If you and I are presented with a problem, we think about, okay, what are the short-term ramifications if we do this? If we take this course of action, how's that going to affect the problem immediately? But we also take into consideration what is this short-term plan we have? How's it going to affect us on down the road when we have to face something different? And so abstract thinking will allow people to make decisions based on consequences further down the line. But if you're intellectually challenged and you're a concrete thinker, you're not thinking about anything but what's happening to you right now and how can you get out of it.
Okay.
And so his confession, I believe, was put in the category of a false compliant confession, where the person didn't believe he did it. And it's interesting to watch those kind of confessions where the police actually convinced the guy that they did it, because it goes from, well, maybe you blacked out, maybe you were intoxicated, maybe you were on drugs. And eventually the guy finally says, you know what, I may have blacked out. Maybe I did kill her. I don't know. And before they wrap it up real tidy, they get a handwritten confession of, of him saying he did it, but he didn't do it. But they convinced him that he did. So Miss Kelly knew he didn't do it, but he didn't see any other way out but to tell him what they wanted to hear.
Wow.
Because they told him he was going to go home if he did. So since then, I've been championing the law requiring a complete and total video of each interrogation. That's what defense lawyers, and I used to be a defense lawyer before I became a judge, we call them interrogations. The police call them interviews. It sounds a little nicer and less
Well, yeah.
challenging and stressful. But excuse me, my throat's dry. this wasn't Jesse Miskelly's confession. This was Gary Gitchell and Brian Red's confession. They were the two police officers that fed him the information. And so we put on our alibi, and most of the people that were on our alibi list had already been interrogated by the police and denied seeing. That's my Facebook page. It just popped up. Somebody commented on. So we basically got steamrolled by this prosecution judge duo kind of situation.
Wow.
And then we got thrown under the bus by the Supreme Court, and then the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, which I really thought we had a good shot at, but only one in about 10,000 cases actually are heard by the Supreme Court when you file a petition with them. So the odds were against me. I knew that, but I thought maybe I had a novel issue that needed to be resolved, but they didn't see it that way. So when the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled on the case in '96, I want to say, it was a 7-0 decision. And when we left oral arguments that day, before they made their ruling, my law partner, Greg Crow, was a law clerk for a Missouri appellate court judge. And he has a knack for being able to call the cases just based on the body language and the questions that the justices ask. And we were picking up our books and files and putting them in briefcases. And he said, Dan, he said, we either just lost 3-4 or won 4-3, but it's 4-3 or 3-4. And eventually things happened to make us believe that was the case. I'm not going to spoil it, but and I probably said too much already, but most of the people that put the reviews up on Amazon and the other review place, Wordsmith, or I can't recall the name of it, but
Goodreads, maybe?
Goodreads, yeah. We got a 4.6 rating currently, and that's because some people have made up some fake Facebook pages and put posts on either my Facebook page for the book or on Amazon or Goodreads. And of course, on Amazon, it'll tell you whether the person actually bought the book or not.
Mm-hmm.
So all the people who said this was a fairy tale of a book and none of this stuff was true, that I was just doing this to try to make money off dead people, and they never read the book. And one particular guy who I met one time, and he is a true believer. He has drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and he posted and put his name on Amazon and said, Stidham didn't address this, and this in the book, and I addressed everything he was complaining about. And so it was obvious that he hadn't read the book. So I've got 4 or 5 people like that, and of course, one of the victims' dads posted something negative, and I expected that to happen, and I feel sorry for him, and I understand what he's gone through because I've recently lost a child myself, an adult child, not an 8-year-old, but it's not something you ever get over. You just have to get used to the new normal. And my wife also lost her second born less than a year ago. So it's
Wow.
been
So
an
sorry.
unhappy place at the Stidham
Right.
family household here, but we're getting along better, and it's a little easier each day. Holidays are tough, and anniversaries are tough, but you got to keep on living. That's what the kid would want you to do. So
Right.
I now have a better understanding of what the victims' families went through.
Okay.
My son wasn't murdered; he died in his sleep. But it just I was able to pour the book through the filter of having lost a child, and I think that even though I didn't want it to happen or never dreamed it could happen, you don't bury your kids; you bury your parents, and they
Right.
eventually
Yeah.
get old and fragile. Um, but so I get it now better than I did before. So, but I mean, it is what it is. Two of the three victims' family members actually came over and joined the defense team at the end of the case, um, which is very unusual. And when you have the victim of a dead 8-year-old call you and tell you they don't trust the prosecutor and they want to give you evidence instead of the prosecutor, that's a pretty good sign that they're not convinced that the right people were in prison.
Yeah, that does seem pretty odd.
It's
Uh,
very, very odd.
I mean, doesn't seem like something you hear. Definitely not something you hear every day. Uh, we had a couple of questions come into the chat, and so one of the questions came in, and you mentioned the stepdad of one of the victims, and this is probably only tangentially related, but one of the questions was, so you're not of the opinion it was the stepdad of one of the victims?
No,
And
I'm
that was
not.
followed up with allegedly, of course. So,
Well, this is a fine line of distinction, but the only physical evidence in the case is DNA that was found on a shoelace. They were bound with their own shoelaces, and the DNA came back to one of the stepfathers,
okay.
and but it was not a sample that could be used to convict someone. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a DNA guy because I had such talented lawyers who were experts on DNA. It's just well, I learned to speak Spanish when you don't need to, so I didn't pay that much attention. It is a science, and I understand most of it, but when you get down to the details, it's like back in the old days when I first started practicing law, we had a juvenile master who would determine paternity literally by looking at a kid's earlobe and the putative father's earlobe. And if he thought they matched, that guy had to pay child support for that kid for 18 years. Of course, now we have DNA, and it'll tell you I've seen 100%, 99%. But in the stepfather situation, there was such a huge part of the population that we couldn't exclude uh, to the DNA sample means mostly nothing.
Okay.
Uh, I can't remember the exact figures, but um, they weren't able to exclude about 80 to 90% of the people in the population, general population.
Wow.
So it was the the DNA was a partial DNA. It wasn't a complete. Uh, Actually, was composed of two separate male DNAs, and so it's kind of interesting. But it didn't give us enough to put in CODIS to look for someone who might have had their DNA taken when they were arrested for a crime. So didn't match any of the databases. But I the one stepfather that everybody initially assumed did it because he acted so strange on the documentary, Mark Byers. I could timeline him for every minute, and there's no way that he could have done it. So And in fact, he eventually lost interest and trust in the prosecution, and he came over to our team. And the other stepfather, as the one that we found the DNA on the shoelace, and a friend that was out looking for the kids with him, we found a hair that matched his DNA. And it was more solid, but still, it just means he was there. It doesn't mean that he killed the kids. There's no way that Mr. Hobbs will ever be prosecuted unless there's more evidence that appears. And I clearly say that in the book.
Okay.
And as a defense lawyer, it's not your job to prove your client is innocent. It's your job to prove somebody else could have done it. And the best evidence in the case is that DNA. Despite its inadequacies, it's still the best physical evidence. There's none whatsoever, not a hair, fiber, fingerprint, footprint, nothing connecting the West Memphis Three to these trials. The only connection is the family members, Terry Hobbs. That's who it was. And he was the stepfather of Stevie Branch. So if I was a prosecutor, I wouldn't certainly go after him based on that evidence alone. There'd have to be something else go along with it.
Okay.
But I think we're dealing with an over-the-road serial killer. That's my hypothesis that I'm working from, and hopefully before another 30 years goes by, I'll have found him. But we still don't have a full DNA profile to look in the databases, and so it's going to take a miracle because of the lack of physical evidence to pin this on anybody unless they confess, and we can corroborate that confession with something tangible. And I was 30 years old then. I'm 60 now, so it's very possible that person is deceased, who committed the crime. It's possible that he's in prison for something else. So there's a lot of, it was a miracle that we got these kids out of prison, even in the way it happened. It was the right thing to happen, but it was the wrong way for it to occur. And that was the final thing that I wanted to explain, because before COVID, when I was traveling around the country speaking to groups about the case and the need for full recordation of interviews or interrogations, however you want to put it, that they should be videotaped from beginning to end. And there's even a statute that most states have passed that's called the Police Officer Bill of Rights. And Arkansas passed it, but they let a clause in there that says this only applies if the municipality or the county adopts it as part of an ordinance or adopts it as law for their locality, is the best way to say that. So, and West Memphis had not done that. So, but the Police Officer Bill of Rights says that if a police officer is accused of misconduct of any kind, he has the right to have a lawyer present. In fact, he can't be interrogated without a lawyer present. It has to be recorded from beginning to end, videotaped, and he gets periodic rests, and there can only be one officer interviewing at one time instead of the tag team routine. So the cops knew enough about false confessions to protect themselves from each other, but you and I, as ordinary citizens, don't share those rights. Those are rights guaranteed to them through statute, not through the Constitution.
Interesting. Another question that came up: how did this case affect how you run your courtroom now?
Well, as I said earlier, we don't allow Alfred pleas in my courtroom because if you didn't do it, I'm not going to find you guilty until we have a trial and the state or the city proves that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Um, uh, it's a high burden, and it should be. So, a lot of people come in, they'll say, "Hey, I just drove all the way here from Fayetteville or Texarkana over this speeding ticket, and I wasn't speeding, but I'm just going to plead guilty and pay it to get it over with." And I say, "No, you're not. You either were speeding or you weren't. So we'll have a trial a couple months from now, and we'll figure it out. We'll sort through it. But I'm not going to find somebody guilty who's not going to plead guilty." So I don't allow that in my courtroom. But this experience, though traumatic, um, I have PTSD now. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was for people who came back from fighting in the war. I didn't realize that you could get that from any kind of trauma, and it was very traumatic. Getting run over by buses and kicked in the teeth for 18 years and 78 days, and denied at every appeal. And it affected the way I slept at night, and the nightmares and all that stuff. This past New Year's, um, I don't think people do fireworks around here for New Year's. I don't recall any. I've lived here 60 years of my life. I don't, maybe a few, but we were in Destin, Florida, and they started shooting off fireworks, and it put me into a panic because of the loud noises. And so I have some of the same symptoms that people do that come back from the war. And there's a chapter or two that talks about that in the book. I'm very candid. I was unwilling to do that for a long time, but I felt like to tell the story and be honest about everything, that I needed to be honest about how the case affected me personally and my family. And this case has affected a lot of lives. I just saw the pictures of the dead kids. I didn't go down in the ditch and pull them out of the water. So that police officer's probably got some trauma as well. That's not something you see every day, obviously. But I I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in a long time, and haven't had any nightmares since the book was released, and long before that, actually. So um, things are kind of knitting back together for me, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, that's good. That's great. It's glad to see that that's, hey, healing's a process. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's not, but being able to make progress, that's great. I'm glad to be
And
able to see that's happening.
when you're in combat, and I was not in combat in the sense of, being on the battlefield, but I was in combat with prosecutors and a judge. He was a
Hmm.
former prosecutor, and appellate court judges and deadlines and people who thought I was crazy. I was kind of the Don Quixote of Paragould. Everybody thought I was crazy because I thought these kids were innocent when everybody else assumed they were guilty because they were found guilty. So that wears on your soul. And uh, so I talk a lot about that, and I actually talk about how it happened, which is an interesting story in and of itself. I was speaking to a group of high school students about the case, and in fact, I was invited by the high school kid to come and talk about the case in Baltimore, and in 2014, and kids are brutally honest about everything. They don't hold back, and they're not going to say things like, what happened to your son? Why did he die? Or how did he die? Or people always want to know those details, but most adults are smart enough not to ask somebody something that personal. But a kid is, even a teenager is, they're going to be brutally honest. And this 16-year-old kid said, "How's this case affected you personally?" And I didn't want to talk about it because talking about it makes it worse, or it did at the time. So I just deflected the question like a well-seasoned politician and went on. But all the way back to Memphis, to the airport, I thought about that kid's question, and it began to haunt me. And so that was the genesis for me being able to finally talk about how it has affected me. And so I talk about that in the book. And as I stated earlier, I'm as hard on myself as I am um, the other people involved in the case.
Okay.
But like I said, when you try to explain an Alford plea to a group of high schoolers, it's nearly impossible for them to wrap their minds around. And when I was speaking in front of lawyers, it was hard for them to wrap their mind around. How could there be such a thing? And so my goals in the book was to, number one, explain what a false confession was. Number two, explain just how handicapped Jesse Miskelly was. And three, explain what really happened at the trials when the cameras weren't rolling sometimes in chambers and in the back hall outside the jury room. That should have never happened. And I wanted to be able to explain what an Alford plea was and how it happened, who was responsible for bringing it on and making it happen. And so those were my goals. So based on the reviews, I was successful in doing that. And so I'm proud of the work, and I'm proud of the work my co-author and I did. And I'm glad he stuck it out with me for 10 years. So that's amazing in and of itself.
Yeah. So, and this is completely kind of out of left field. You said your original draft was over 500 pages long, and that was way too long to be published. Um, have you considered using part of that material and maybe writing a second book?
Yeah, I have, and there were some. We made a list of what we called aha moments. Things that people didn't know, that had never been talked about in any of the documentaries or any other books about the case, and we had to leave some out. So there's still some there. Um, Obviously, the case is still evolving. There's still litigation about retesting some of the evidence filed by Damien Eccles, and who now has gotten over just being out of prison. He wants more. He wants to be pardoned and exonerated. And of course, that's what we all wanted, and that's what we should have done. But how do you tell a mentally handicapped kid that, if you just say that you did it while maintaining your innocence, and he couldn't even express it. He had to read it from a piece of paper that his lawyer had written down, and he can barely read and write. So it was difficult for him to even convey it in court. But how do you explain something? And of course, that's where that concrete thinking comes in. He thought, no, here's the reward, and here's what I got to get to do or this is what I got to do to get the reward.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wanted to go home, and I promised him I'd get him out of prison. So he got home. So I kept my promise, even though I had nothing to do with. I was still a witness at the time with the Alford plea, and so it and that made me very angry. And I started telling you the story about the psychologist, and I went down another rabbit hole. But I sent the chapter on Jesse's mental capabilities to the psychologist who interviewed him post trial, and to make sure that I had quoted him correctly and understood the concepts correctly, and was conveying that to my future readers. And he emailed me back, and after he read it, and he said, "Yeah, everything's right. You said the right things and explained it right." But he said, "Why are you so pissed off?" And I said, then I thought, so I emailed him back and I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, it comes out in your writing. You're pissed off at the world, and why are you pissed off? Your client's out of prison, and you kept your promise, and but I'd always had this vision in my mind as a metaphor of walking into the Coliseum like Russell Crowe and beheading my opponents for all the wrongdoings that they committed during the case. And of course, that the Alford police stole that from me, and I never got to find closure and peace. And finally, after thinking about it and therapy, going through some therapy, I was able to realize it's as simple as it is what it is. And even though I didn't have anything to do with it, the result was they got out of prison. That was the ultimate goal. They made it through their 10-year period, so now they're completely free of any ramifications. And so, but they're convicted felons in the eyes of the law, and it's not fair. And it's not fair that I didn't get to go. I would have resigned my judgeship immediately just to sit at counsel table during the second trial to watch him walk out a free man in that fashion. But that might have taken another 5 years or 10 years to get that far down the road. And when somebody says you can go home now, it's hard to say no to something like that after you've wasted the best years of your life
Right.
in a fetid Arkansas prison. They're not very nice places. Each time I visited, I'd be so depressed for weeks afterwards, especially at Christmas time or something. I'd go down and see. Sometimes I would just visit with my client, and sometimes I'd visit with my client when he was housed in the same facility as Jason Baldwin. I'd visit with them both, um, and once or twice I was able to visit with all three of them, not at the same time, but I was able to see Damien on death row, and he was just a kid who, if he grew up in L.A. or New York, he would have just been another goth kid from the early '90s. But in West Memphis, Arkansas, he stuck out like a sore thumb, so he was the perfect scapegoat. And he was, he'll admit this, and he has admitted it publicly in books he's written and interviews he's given, that he was arrogant because he thought that if you didn't really do it, you can't be found guilty. He
I mean, there is
misinterpreted
logic
that.
in that. You would think that's the way it should work, right?
It's the way it's supposed to work, but it always doesn't do that. If you go to the Innocence Project site, and I last did that right before the book was published because I wanted to check the latest stats, and I think they've exonerated about 323 people through DNA, and what a successful program it is. It's amazing, and a third of the people that they exonerated through DNA gave false confessions. So if you think about all the executions that have happened in the last 30 years or the last 100 years, you can begin to realize how many innocent people have been executed or died in prison serving life sentences for things they didn't do. And so it's a fascinating. There are several factors that lead to false confessions: police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, inadequate defense counsel, and that's the major ones, and false confessions, of course. But it's just the look on somebody's face when they're walking out of that prison, they're walking out of that courthouse, is just, it's the best feeling that you can, other than the birth of your children, that you could ever experience. And I kept my promise, and I finally determined that that was good enough. I'm still out there working because even though it's not going to matter to my client, because he's never going to be able to get a job or probably never be able to draw Social Security because he's a convicted felon. But Jason wants to go to law school, and he can't with a felony conviction. He actually can go to law school, he just can't be a lawyer. So we need a governor who is intelligent enough to understand the facts of the case and apply them. And unfortunately, that governor is probably in junior, maybe a freshman in high school right now. So eventually, somebody will get it right and realize. And that was another purpose for the book, is I thought if I set the record straight and explained all the evidence, set it forth in one place for the reader to look at it all. It's just such a sad story. It's everything that's in that book I can approve. In fact, I'm sitting here looking at the magic box that contains all the evidence that I need to demonstrate why I put this in the book or put that in the book. And I'm cataloging it, and then it's going to go in a fireproof facility and be stored. So if anybody tries to burn my house down, I'll have a digital copy as well.
Well, hopefully nobody will do that.
Well,
so I mean, that seems a bit extreme.
I've had my mailbox blown up twice with small bombs and numerous death threats. The day the Daily Press did a story on me writing the book back in 2014 or 2012, actually, I think it was, my mailbox got blown up that day.
Wow.
So I just go to Lowe's and buy the ugliest mailbox that I could find, because I knew it was going to get blown up again. And sure enough, it got blown up again. Also, the day that Daily Press article came out, I got death threats from 2 different continents. So there are people out there who are true believers, and a mind can be a terrible thing for people who don't understand logic and are abstract thinkers. Yeah, well, I could name some, but I'd get in trouble. But the world's not like it used to be, and it's all because of the internet, this mystical, magical thing that everybody thought was going to be the greatest thing that ever happened to the world, but it's turned into a political dogfight, and but we were compelled to have to deal with the good and the bad of it. And
Right.
I just thank the good Lord that I think the internet was available in 1993, but we didn't have Facebook and Snapchat and all this other stuff to deal with. So it was mostly newspaper articles and television stories to deal with. So trying to try a case like that in today's world would be, oh my God, it would be, I'd have to have Secret Service protection. I'm joking about that because I wouldn't be entitled to it. But instead of carrying one gun with me everywhere I go, I now carry two. So far, there hasn't been any backlash or threats. Because I think once people read it, they say, you know what, this makes sense. It didn't happen the way the prosecutor said. It didn't happen the way they presented it. And here's cold hard proof of how it happened, and it wasn't the first ever satanic ritualistic homicide on the planet. But there are still people out there today preaching that garbage, that do seminars for law enforcement officers on satanic crimes, and kids will dabble with things and listen to heavy metal music and wear all black. And so did Johnny Cash. He was born down the road in Dyess, Arkansas, 50 miles from West Memphis. So he wasn't a Satanist, or at least nobody accused him of it that I know of. I like to wear black. So I mean, one of the ironies that's not in the book, that was one of those aha moments that we didn't put in the book, was after the Alford plea was over. My youngest was a senior, and Scott Ellington's son was a junior, I believe. And they were playing, my son's team was playing Ellington's son's team. And of course, the Alford plea had just happened, and at the end of football season. And so we were talking about the case, and all of a sudden the marching bands come on at halftime and they're playing Metallica music. I just looked at him and I thought, I never thought I'd see the day that I would hear a Metallica song at a high school football game. And
Well, now it's considered classic rock.
that's right. I mean, it'll be elevator music pretty soon. It's oh gosh, it's just one of the, and even when I was a kid, growing up in high school in the late 70s, bands like Ozzy's band, I forgot what they were called. Ozzy Osbourne's band. I can't remember the name of the band. Of course, he brought all that on himself for the most part, just for publicity and selling records. But AC/DC was considered. There were rumors going around about if you played it backwards on the record player, it would be satanic voices, all this crazy stuff. But that it was. Now it takes 3 seconds for a legend or a myth or a falsehood to make it around the world. Back in the late 70s, it took years for all those stories to make the rounds, all the wives' tales, and so the world has changed dramatically, and some of it's good, but most of it's bad. And one of our former leaders has made it a sport to be racist and say bad things to people and about people, and now everybody thinks they can do it too, and it's just not nice to do that. that's not the way I was raised. My mom told me, like most moms did, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. But it's a problem, and I don't know the answer. But I know what the outcome is going to be if we lose our democracy, and I'm very concerned about that. Not just as a judge, but as a dad and a grandfather. You know, we need to start thinking about what kind of world we're going to leave behind for Keith Richards and our grandkids. I don't know if you got that joke or not, but
Yeah, I did.
okay.
Yes.
But I saw a meme about that on Facebook here a while back. But I mean, look what's happening with the weather, and everybody seems to think, it's no big deal. But it is a big deal. We're not supposed to have tornadoes all year round, and twice as many hurricanes as we used to, and California is about to slide into the Pacific. So it's too dry in the summer and too wet in the winter and the spring. So it's just, and I don't remember it being this hot when I was a kid. I'd go outside and play all day, and never drink water or do hydrate or anything. And now I can go out to the mailbox, and it just feels so hot that you just inhumane. I think you could fry an egg on some asphalt if you tried. I hate summertime because of that. But,
I'm right there with you. I'm not a big fan of hot weather.
no, I like the weather we're having right now. It's just about right. But it's not going to last forever.
No, I think it's supposed to freeze next week. So.
Yeah, go back to, it seems like the last few years we've gotten the snow in March, the first week of March. And a couple times in November, I'd be in a place that was supposed to be cold speaking to a group about the caves, and it'd be snowing back in Paraguay. I was like, what? So it just, it's crazy weather, and it's brought on by human activity, despite what a lot of people want to say. But we are not being kind to our planet. I don't know how we got down that road, but it's very, very true.
Hey, the name of this channel is Sidetracks and Splinters because, I mean, I get off on so many sidetracks on a regular basis. Another YouTuber that I watch occasionally, he drew a diagram of his thought process, and he's like, okay, he says, so a normal person's thought process is they start here and they go here. He says, and my thought process is I start here and I go and eventually end up over there. So, it's just like, I understand that. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, life gets chaotic. When I was a kid, there was Boy Scouts and 4-H and Future Farmers of America, and I was an Eagle Scout, so I didn't do the 4-H and the I never had any desire to be a farmer. I still don't. But a lot of people did back when I was in high school. But I wanted to be a lawyer ever since I could say it, say the word, and never deviated from that. So I never thought I'd be a judge, but that happened too. But I really enjoy my job, and I'm privileged to be able to serve the citizens of Greene and Clay counties. I cover 2 counties now, so it's a lot more difficult job than I had before with just Greene County. In fact, it's going to be a long night because I've got a bunch of things I need to sign for the police. I had a doctor's appointment today, and that took up my morning and early afternoon, and that resulted in me having to go through more tests. And So I got to go back on Friday. They think everything's fine, but they just want to make sure.
Right. Hey,
And when you're a lawyer, you get every test in the world.
yeah.
And I'm fine with that. I got good insurance. That's one of the perks of being a judge,
Well, that's
to
good.
having good insurance. So I'm not complaining at all.
Well, it is kind of late, and I know you said you have lots of work to do, and I don't want you to have to, have too late of an evening.
Well,
But
I
we've
was
been talking for
telling,
about 2 hours now. So
I just looked up at that, and it seems like 20 minutes to me.
yeah,
But I hope that people will read the book, and I say that not because I'm interested in making money. I'm just interested in bringing awareness to the truth of the case and the people who never had to, uh, after a war, there's always war crimes, and atrocities are punished. And in this case, there was no war crimes tribunal or any nobody. The ship sunk, and they were able to swim away like nothing ever happened, and they can always say they were guilty because they pled guilty, and they won't tell you that while maintaining their innocence part.
hmm
But some of the people I worked with, including one of the prosecutors, just man of his word, and if he told me something, it was true, and I didn't have to worry about whether it was going to be that way or not. But I didn't have the luck to have both prosecutors fall into that category. But it happened, and the world needs to know the truth. And so we're going to. That's why we chose to publish it on Amazon, because we didn't want to have to deal with the publishing world that's changed so dramatically.
right.
And they want everything, and they make money, and you don't make nothing. And I've got 30 years of my life into this thing, 10 hard years of running or writing a book. And again, I can't say enough about my co-author, Tom. He's an amazing guy. Um, and So we've been doing book signings. I've got one every weekend. We didn't this past weekend. So 3 out of 4 weekends we had book signings. I've got one tomorrow, Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock at Weber's Bookstore in downtown Paragould. And people often ask me how to get there, and I just say it's the first building on Court Street east of the post office, and it's a great bookstore. They've got some great stuff in there, and I want to support my local community, and so we do book signings, and he stocks the book so people can buy it, and then I do the signing. So it works out great, and um, I talked to Barnes and Nobles today in Jonesboro, and actually the negotiations for that started a few weeks ago. Um, I got a call from their they got blown away by the tornado a few years ago.
Yeah.
When it's kind of weird, only the I forgot what they call them in the business lingo, but the anchor stores on each end of the mall were the only ones that survived. Dillard's and Target. Everything else was demolished. It was kind of weird, but they are opening a brand new Barnes and Nobles, and I can't remember the name of the store that was in there before, but it's right next to Office Max.
Yeah, I don't remember what
And,
was in there before. I know last year at Halloween it was the spirit store, but
oh, really? I didn't know that.
yeah.
It was a high end. My wife loved that store. She liked to go in there and buy stuff to decorate the house with, and they sold linens and pillows and candles. And Pier One, I think, was the name of it.
Okay.
And so I've been playing phone tag with this guy trying to get this nailed down, and so I'm going to be there. I don't know the time yet, but their supplier can actually order my book on Amazon directly from Amazon. I didn't know that was possible, and I'm glad that it is because it's going to be in Barnes and Noble, and a lot of people will see it.
Oh, that's cool.
And they showcase local authors and authors from the state of Arkansas, and so they're trying to get Mara Leverett, who wrote Devil's Knot, to come back, but they're not sure. She lives in Olympia, Washington now in the Northwest, so she's sort of retired, and I hope she comes back. It'd be great to see her. And then another local author has written some short stories or articles about the West Memphis case, George Jared. I think he's going to be there too. And so I hope there's three of us. I'm going to try to get a hold of Mara tomorrow and see if she can make it. But that's fantastic. And I'll be in Mountain Home on the 17th at the Treat Your Shelf Books at 809 South Main Street, Mountain Home. And the lady that opened that bookstore has some roots from Paragould, and she invited me, and so I'll be up there doing that on the 17th. And the dates are filling in quickly, so I stay busy, and I also stay exhausted trying to keep up with all of it.
That is part of it. Yes.
I haven't even been on Facebook in 2 days to answer questions and respond to people just because I just haven't had the time. I've been so busy in court. And I got home from court yesterday and had supper and sat in the recliner and started signing stuff. And about the third affidavit I signed, I did this, and I woke up and I didn't even know what I was looking at on my phone to sign it. So I just went to bed and decided to do it today.
Yeah.
So I got most of them done, but I've still got a few more to do. And that's one good thing about an iPhone. I had a flip phone up until I had an opponent in 2016, my only opponent I've ever had. And I had a flip phone. All I needed to do was text and call people. I didn't need all this fancy schmancy stuff. And then I realized I did, so that I could communicate and have a Facebook page. And of course, you can do that on a computer as well, but most people do it on their phones. So now, if I forget it and leave it at home, I'm like lost all day at court because I've lost my way to communicate with the world. So it's amazing how you take stuff for granted, and then when it's gone, it's like, how did I get through the day without my iPhone?
Right.
But also, I would ask people, listeners, to if you like the book, go to Goodreads and go to Amazon and post a review. That's very helpful. And we debuted at number 1 in true crime and serial killers the first week we were online on Amazon.
Oh, nice.
And so people on Amazon, I thought it was funny because the Arkansas Times did a story about me in my work in the case in '96. So I was barely into the case then, but I've been told I'm the only Paragould resident who's ever been on the cover of the Arkansas Times. And the title that the writer chose was John Grisham Meet Dan Stidham. And so the other day I was looking at the reviews, and it said customers who buy A Harvest of Innocence also buy this book, and it was John Grisham's new book, and I thought the irony of that.
Right. Hey. Well, hey, it sounds like you're in good company for sure.
Well, he's gonna be everything he writes is magic and solid gold, and that's when the PTS hit me, is when after the trials were over and we were waiting for the transcript to get done. And of course, it was about that thick. And I didn't have anything to do for the first time in months. And so I started reading John Grisham novels. And even though he's never really been a courtroom lawyer, he's got a law degree, but I don't think he has ever practiced because he's such a good writer. But if I had read A Time to Kill before the Miss Kelly trial, I would have done things a lot different than I did. So I actually sent a copy of the Arkansas Times for him to autograph for me, but I never got a response back. So, of course, I'm sure he gets thousands of those a day, but or maybe he just got mad about the headline with my name and his name together. I don't know, but I'm really proud of my book, and I'm proud of Tom hanging with me for so long. And when he didn't have to, and he did, because it was an important story, and he knew as well as I did that it needed to be told. So I hope you'll read the book and understand what the West Memphis case was really about, and how it unfolded, and how it was prosecuted, and all the things that nobody ever knew but me. And I couldn't tell at the time because I had to be able to count on the Arkansas Supreme Court to eventually rule in my favor. And calling people names and throwing rocks at their house is not a good way to make friends and influence people, or get a good ruling from the court.
Right. Yes.
So I was basically a ninja, fighting a guerrilla warfare in this war that I call my war. And I'm just glad I got to tell the story. And even though it didn't end the way that I wanted it to, the book did, but the story didn't end the way I wanted to. I wanted it to end in the courtroom with an acquittal, instead of this Mickey Mouse oxymoronic Alford plea. But it is what it is. It's all done. We can't go back and undo it and retry the case. So the issue still is, will we be able to test the evidence again, and will we be able to raise enough money for funding to do that? And I promised a couple people, important people, in the sense that it was their children who were murdered, that I would never give up looking for this person who did it, and I'm still looking. And so that day of the Alford plea, in which I didn't understand completely at the time, I thought the burden was about to be lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally get on with my life and move on to something else. But Pam Hobbs and Mark Myers both came up to me in the courtroom and said, please find the killer. And so what could I say? But I'll do it. Mr. Byers passed away in a car accident a few years ago. The odds are against me, but I like it when people underestimate me because I talk funny, and when I go out and travel and speak about the case with this Arkansas accent, people automatically will think, no wonder you lost the case. You talk funny,
Well,
And there's this
funny's a relative term here.
stereotype of, so I like it when people underestimate me. So I finally got talked into doing the Audible book the other day, so I'm actually going to narrate the Audible book and get it online.
Okay.
And a lot of people have been asking for that, so I'm trying to get over this ear infection that just won't seem to go away. So my voice is a little bit stronger, and but I hope to get that accomplished in March. I hope to have that ready by March at the latest. They said it's going to take about 90 hours of studio time. So that's a long time. And of course, when I read the book, I always want to make a change. Every time I would get the final draft done, I would go back and read it again and say, I need to change this or I need to change that because that doesn't sound right. And correct errors and mistakes. And so when I was practicing the other night, reading it and recording it on my phone, number one, I found myself ad-libbing and not reading the exact words in the book for emphasis and tone, which I guess it's my book. I guess I can do that. And then when I listened to it, I thought, that don't even sound like me because it's your own voice. You're
Right.
not
Yeah.
used to hearing your voice on a recorder, and when you hear it when you're talking, you obviously recognize it in your head. But when you're speaking into a recorder or listening to yourself on a podcast or on a TV interview or something like that, it just doesn't sound right. But
Sure.
everybody thinks that I'm the one who should do it. I thought we should get somebody with a really good neutral speaking voice, and I don't have as much of a southern accent as a lot of people do, but they noticed it in Ireland when I was there, and they would line up on the street to hear me say five because it has 6 syllables when I say it, and so when I grew up, my mom was from Minnesota, and I would go up there to spend the summers, and my cousins would relentlessly tease me for the way I talked, and so I don't know why. I guess it just hung with me. And of course, thank God the Beverly Hillbillies were not from Arkansas; they were from Tennessee. So, but that was what they would call me, as hillbilly. That's just how kids are. But I took it in stride. But I genuinely appreciate not only you inviting me, but waiting for an hour for me to figure out how to do something that I'd never done before. And I had a couple hours to teach a class, and it's kind of become our annual gig. Here's another question.
No, this is a comment. This is actually my girlfriend, and
Oh,
she's from New Jersey. So she says, I know what you mean about people wanting you to repeat words,
yeah. And
because we often give her a hard time about being from Jersey, and
she talks like Tony Soprano, and
kind of,
yeah.
when she says my name, it occasionally has about 7 A's in it. Instead of being Larry, it ends up being Larry. So yeah, we
I went on a trip to D.C. Clinton was in the White House still, so that's how long ago it was.
Oh, yes, and the
And,
coffee.
and they had us in a bus. We flew, as I recall, we flew out there and then got on a tour bus, and we'd go to a different place every day. And of course, now they don't let you in the White House for tours, but unless you get invited. But they don't do public tours anymore. And we were getting ready to go to the White House, and we were at breakfast, and the teacher, whose name I won't mention because I don't want to embarrass her, who was the sponsor of the trip, and I was a chaperone. We were standing in the breakfast buffet at Denny's or somewhere. I don't remember what the name of the restaurant was, but it was one of those chain restaurants, and there were some people from Boston right in front of us, and I could tell she was intently listening to him. I was too, because I loved to hear him talk. And she finally turned around, looked at me. She goes, "Dan, what language are they speaking?" And I said, "That is Yankee." I didn't know how else to describe it. So it's amazing, the dialects, and you can tell people the difference between people from Texas and Georgia and Alabama and Florida and the Midwest, and so it's amazing that, and I don't know where that imaginary line is in Missouri, where you suddenly leave the South and enter the North, where they don't say y'all at all, and but there is that magic line somewhere, but I just don't know for sure where it is. Maybe Cape Girardeau or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that would be either.
But back when I would go see my cousins in Minnesota, we call everything Cokes, whether it's Pepsi or Dr. Pepper or whatever. It's a Coke. That's what we
Right.
call it.
Yeah.
And up there, everything there is called a pop. You want a can of pop or a bottle of pop. And so my cousins came to visit Paragould one time, and they stopped at a convenience store, and my cousin went in and she said, "We would like to buy some pop. Do you have a cooler, or do you have any here?" And the lady said, "We don't sell pot here in this store."
Well, close. Yeah.
So touche. As I thought, well, karma's tough. You finally get down here in my world, and then you get caught saying pop. Oh, but I thanks for putting up with my inability to understand technology, and thanks for going ahead and going through with the program. I've actually enjoyed it tremendously, and maybe as things progress along with the book, maybe we can do this again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate you being here. And things happen. Technology, it's our biggest friend, and sometimes it's our biggest headache. So I get that and understand. I'm glad we were finally able to connect and make this happen tonight. And I appreciate you taking the time to reach out to me. Will confess to you that I haven't read your book. I picked up a copy of it. My daughter asked me to pick up a copy that she had signed, so she has a copy of it. And but I will see you on Saturday at Weber's sometime between 1 and 3, and I'll make sure I pick up a copy there and have you sign it while I'm there.
All right,
So,
fantastic. I look forward to seeing you.
And yeah, let's do this again sometime. Maybe we'll talk about you can give me a sneak preview of what's coming for book number 2, and I look forward to being able to see you in person and shake your hand this coming Saturday. Thank
Sounds
you
fantastic.
so much for your time tonight, Dan.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I'll see you later.
You. See you.
That was Dan Stidham, a local author And if you would like a copy of his book, A Harvest of Innocence, The Untold Story of the West Memphis Three, you can get that this Saturday at Weber's Bookhouse in downtown Paragould. And with that, yeah, we've been on here almost 3 hours tonight. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you. Until then, until we talk to you next time, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out. You guys be safe, be careful. We'll talk to you next time. Good night, everybody.